Howdy, I'd like to take a few minutes to elaborate on some comments that I included in my draft platform regarding some topics for the political parties to consider as we approach the 2024 elections. And I'd like to talk about education, developing a platform for education that makes a positive difference. I'm going to list some specific ideas, some of which would require, I guess, a revamping or clarification of the system that we already have, which frankly seems kind of scattered as we have so many different decisions from state to state. And yet we have the Department of Education and the federal government, which many have suggested, or at least a few have suggested, particularly on the right, that it be eliminated. And I'm not for necessarily eliminating the Department of Education, but I am for clarifying its purpose and the purpose of education in general. My initial comments, you can click on the link down below to go to that video. But I'd like in this video to go through and consider some specific proposals, some issues that we might want to address as we think about what we're trying to accomplish with education in the United States. So what is the purpose of education? Well, broadly speaking, I would suggest the purpose of a formal education program is to develop the individual's innate abilities as an animal with the ability to reason. There are all kinds of things throughout this discussion that would hopefully open the door for further discussion, and I look forward to hearing back from y'all on that. But the first point I want to make is just this broad point of why do we educate to begin with? What is the point of school and spending the money and the time that we spend on it to educate the citizens? And so, and not just the citizens, but anybody, educate human beings. So, as we can think, how do we best utilize our ability to think? How do we develop our ability to think? And a formal education program will work to realize those ends, that we become better thinking beings as human beings as a result of having gone through a formal education program. Done properly, the individual will develop both the interest in and ability to continue learning on his or her own. So education isn't, in my opinion, I go for 12 years and then I can graduate from high school and be done. I don't have to worry about learning anything else. Education, broadly speaking, formal education will encapsulate some of those ideas that we think are central to functioning effectively, to serving effectively, to living effectively and happily as a human being, while also instilling in us an appreciation for the process of learning itself, that learning never ends. Done in community, the individual will learn how to interact with a diverse group of individuals while developing his or her own perspectives on being human as framed by the home environment from which he or she enters the world. I'm going to have some more comments on this later, but I am centering my ideas on the idea that education starts at home. It starts in the environment in which we first come to an awareness of ourselves as human beings and as human beings in community, which traditionally is in the context of family. And I realize that the traditional family, the degree to which it's always been under attack and is under attack today, is an institution that I think ought to be defended and needs to be addressed. While there are many in America who do not have or are not being raised in a traditional family, and not just a traditional family in the sense of mom and dad and children, but a traditional family in the sense of mom and dad and children in healthy relationships as part of a larger family, an extended family, as part of a community, as part of ultimately the United States of America, and even more so, fellow human beings in the world. But the starting point is how we as families view education and our role as families in framing the approach to education that we want our children to have, and of which we ourselves were products based on what our parents did or didn't do to facilitate our learning experiences. So the idea is ultimately to develop individuals who are able to think on their own, to appreciate the value of learning, to recognize that there is still much to be learned no matter where we are, at what stage in life, and that individual is also part of a community, and to be able to find ourselves as constructive members in community. So the educational focus, what should we be focusing on as we approach developing a plan for education? I would suggest that a formal education program should focus the individual attention on what has been learned over the course of human history. The information that we have from the past is vast. The information that we are learning about the past continues to grow. And there is so much more to know today about the past. And I'm talking here about the distant past, not just recent past, but distant past, than there was even when I was young, which has been a few years now. And it's only growing every day. But there should also be a natural progression from the basics of knowledge building, as centered in American history and contemporary experience, to more general aspects of critical thinking and decision making skills. We're talking about education in America. We're talking about the developments over time in the context of American history that have brought us to what we consider to be a knowledge base in America. And that's one of the things we need to identify. But part of that involves simply learning how to learn. There's been recent recognition that phonics, in fact, is the best way to learn reading, apart from some other efforts that have been tried over the last few decades. And the importance of reading, the importance of learning basic math skills, et cetera, et cetera. So there are general aspects of critical thinking that come to us that apply in any context, but there are also aspects of an education that's going to take place in the context of America that will differentiate American education from English education, from Sudanese education, from Chinese education, apart from the whatever different frameworks for education those different countries might follow. But some basic understanding that while we may deal with the same topic as a first grade in the first grade and in the 12th grade, how we deal with that topic and the depth of study we approach that topic with, or with respect to that topic, will be vastly different. But there are certain things that we need to learn in progression. And it's important to know what things should be dealt with at what age and how they should be dealt with at any given age in our developmental processes. In the lower grades, the focus should be on the basics, laying the groundwork for the individual's intellectual and social formation. In the degree to which education is taking place in a grade school of 800 students, or a homeschool environment where it's just the mom or dad or grandparent and one or two or five siblings, or whether it's a charter school or a mixture of all of those. The lower grades should focus on laying the groundwork for how we as individuals think, but also recognize the importance of social formation that's taking place in the context of organizing ourselves as groups to study, whether it be a family or a larger traditional school group. While the grade structure should continue to center on age-based classification, there should be greater emphasis placed on intellectual skill development and learning core knowledge concepts, which provide a context for continued educational achievement. The social, I forget what it's called now, but the practice of simply passing students or moving students to the next grade because they've aged out of a previous grade is proving to be destructive for many individuals. It doesn't matter when you learn that 2 plus 2 equals 4, whether that's in kindergarten or the third grade or the fifth grade, with respect to the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4. But until you learn 2 plus 2 equals 4, 2 times 4 equals 8 is not going to make any sense. And so if we continue to simply move students through their educational career without actually ensuring that and working with them to learn the concepts they should learn at each stage in their career, then we're going to continue to have adults who are not only frustrated, but have poor ideas about what their abilities are and what their contributions to society can, excuse me, can and should be. So as students age and move through the age-graded school system, there should be more emphasis on early remedial action and learning tracks within the broader framework of a liberal education. It may be a situation where an individual doesn't grasp math in the first, second, third grade in the way that other students are grasping math. So it may be that they need to be on a track or in a setting where they can work at their own pace to develop and gain the math skills that they need to be successful at higher levels of math, so that by the fourth, fifth, or sixth grade, they have caught up with or maybe even surpassed their peers in their ability to do math at whatever their grade level, which is their age level, might happen to be. So there needs to be a recentering of helping students at any grade level learn the material they need to learn at that grade level in order to progress to the next grade level, with less emphasis on simply moving students forward in the name of keeping them up with their age graded peers. In the middle grades, children should be offered opportunities to experience as much as possible with respect to the variety of work experiences available to them in the world. Most children, as I recall and understand, have a sense of what they want to be when they grow up, and that sense is often based on maybe a movie, maybe their parent, maybe a best friend, maybe an experience they had, but they have some vision: firefighter, astronaut, president, whatever it might be. But the process of recognizing what one can do is in part dependent on the process of understanding what can be done. And so we need to, I think, emphasize more. And frankly, I don't remember a whole lot about my education, up through even perhaps high school, is not as much as I wish I remembered about the process itself. But we ought to be sure that we are allowing young people, students, to begin to appreciate the variety of jobs in the world today and their and their opportunity to pursue a course of study and the value of study in the opportunities they will have to become whatever they want to be. Because whatever you want to be is a whole lot bigger list today than it was 50 years ago, even, let alone 100 or 200 years ago. In the upper grades, the focus should be expanded to include greater emphasis on income potential and finding one's place in society. I think one of the things that we are realizing is that for many people, there is no clear connection between what it is they want to do for life as a matter of employment or hobby or whatever, and what it will cost to do that, and what the return will be on that cost. And I think that is reflected in some of the student debt issues we have, in that on average, I would suggest a sociologist is not going to have the earning power that a medical doctor will have, and that even an engineer will have, or that even an entrepreneur might have. And so we need to have some sense of, as students age through high school, what do I want to be, and how will that impact what my opportunities in life are going to be? If I want to travel Europe for 2 months every summer, every year, then probably a sociology degree isn't the thing I'm going to need to pursue. So what are the things that we need to do to encourage students, particularly as they prepare to graduate high school and move on to the next phase of life, to be, how do we help them be aware of the importance of or the impact of the decisions they're making? So as they reach the latter portion of their high school years, students should be exposed to various employment and career options to foster a broader interest in both their own career paths and in the variety of careers that go into making the world what it is today. Over and over, you'll hear people talking about how it's not what you know, it's who you know that can make a difference in your success or lack of success as you move through your career. And so at this phase, it's not only important to recognize what my career path entails as far as being able to pursue it and what the return from that career will be, but what other related careers or even unrelated careers are there that I need to make time and give attention to uh, relating to, or learn meeting people in those careers in order to facilitate my own success in a given career path, both financially and professionally and personally, just the sense of satisfaction that I have out of doing a job and doing it well, in part because I figured out how my job fits in relationship with other jobs. And finally, having successfully completed their high school education, every student should be provided a monthly stipend for 2 years to be applied to their pursuit of whatever educational or vocational opportunities interest them. I'm going to address this more directly later. I'm not necessarily for just a blanket free college education, community college, or whatever. And I am much more in favor of, if the government is going to provide any funds, those funds being provided uh, in the context of a stipend as opposed to an open-ended check. And those stipends may have more or fewer restrictions on them. But in this case, I'm talking about a stipend that a student can apply, whether it's to vocational training at a local junior college, or as an apprentice to an engineer or an electrician or whatever the case might be, or whether it is to going and following the 4 year or 8 year or 12-year degree plan, whatever it is they want to pursue, but giving every student an opportunity out of the gate, having graduated high school, to move on to that next stage where their training for their career typically begins in earnest. However, prior to receiving the first stipend payment, students must successfully complete a course which surveys the different career development paths available to them, including a review of the implications of choosing one path over another. And this may not be a semester long course as part of their high school schedule. It may just be a weekend or a few evenings or a kind of an extracurricular activity that students have to go through, where they kind of bring together what started in middle school, where they bring together their awareness of the jobs that are out there, the impact of choosing one job over another on their own life and the lives of others, so that they can make better choices as they decide what they want to do post high school graduation. Parents are central to a child's education. I recognize that not every child has a parent, or maybe any parents, let alone a two-parent household today. But I'm going to operate from the assumption that I think is backed up by science and all the data that we have available, that the two-parent household with a mom and a dad in a positive relationship is the best environment in which children can be raised. Yet, whatever the context in which children find themselves being raised, they have no control over that. It's totally based on the decisions of the adults in their lives, beginning with the mother and the father, or the biological dad anyway. So children have no say in this, but I would encourage the parents or the guardians, whoever is responsible for raising the child, recognize the importance of reading. Parents will be encouraged to recognize the value of an education for the benefit of their children and the betterment of society by highlighting the importance of prioritizing reading. So if there's anything I would suggest that the public could do to support individual families in different stages or circumstances of need, one of the most important things, apart from providing shelter and food and clothing and some of those basics, is to ensure that there are books in the home. There's nothing more valuable to learning and to developing a love of learning and gaining knowledge than being able to have access to books and reading materials. Secondly, parents and legal guardians will have the opportunity to have a say in the structure of the educational content of the schools attended by their children. This presumes, to a degree, that there are multiple options: charter schools, public schools, homeschooling, etc., available to the parents and the children. But even if it's a situation where the only real option is the public school system as traditionally understood, there ought to be a recognition that parents have a voice in how that education is structured, how it is framed. All the knowledge that we have gained through studying education, the process of education, the components of an education, the way we as human beings learn, et cetera, are still subject to parents and even the community at large having a voice in saying this is what our education is intended to accomplish, and these are some basic components of how we're going to accomplish that. And so the degree to which there is some concern today that parents are too involved in school boards, I would suggest that we need to find a way to ensure that parents and guardians, where there are not actually the biological parents involved, but parents and guardians have a voice to constructively work with the formally trained educators and others, administrators, regarding the education of the children. When it comes to educators, I'm going to make a couple of suggestions um, that are just kind of broad issue type things. I realize this is a topic that is a hot button issue. The power of the teachers' unions in particular in determining the direction that education goes in the U.S., I think is exceeds what is um, beneficial, not only for the teachers themselves, but for the education system as a whole, and particularly the children. But there are some general things that I would suggest regarding educators and the degree to which we encourage homeschooling and other activities that typically take place without formally trained educators. There may either need to be some exclusions or some clarifications included in anything that's touched on here. But educators properly trained in the technical aspects of education will be sourced in developing effective educational techniques. And this touches on what I covered in the previous slide with respect to how formally trained educators, and that I'm including in this context also the administration of a school system, they ought to be looked to as experts in their subject area for direction and insight and how we educate our children. But I think there's a lot to suggest that today, much of the training and much of the direction that is being taken with respect to our public school system is a reflection not of any sense of what is in the best interest of the student with respect to how we teach, but what are my priorities as an individual in teaching children, whether or not my priorities have anything to do with what education should be about, as I'm talking about in this video, or not. And then finally, periodic competency testing will be required of all teachers. And this has to do more with the public venue and even a formal venue as opposed to, say, homeschooling, but the degree to which homeschool children are learning and doing better on certain measures of competency and education knowledge gain than public school children. The problem seems to be with what are we expecting of our teachers and other educators with respect to training and ability, and how are we working to make sure that they are able to do the job they're asked to do. So this whole slide, this whole idea, talking about educators and what we expect of them, how they ought to be trained, how they ought to be tested over time for more effective development, is something that we need to consider. So, what do we expect of students, or what can we do to help the students appreciate the value of, and in some ways, in the context of human history, the unique position we find ourselves in with respect to providing a general public education? One of the things that I suggest we ought to do is encourage students to recognize the value of an education for achieving both their particular and general goals as those goals change over the years. Most people, even now into adulthood, but throughout their life, throughout their uh, period in kindergarten through high school anyway, will many times change their mind about what they want to be. When you ask somebody, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there are different reasons for that, factors for that. But one of the things that students often fail to recognize is the value of what they're learning in any particular class, given what they think at that moment they want to be when they grow up. Well, I want to be a basketball player, so why do I need to study math? Well, I want to be an engineer. Why do I need to study English? Well, I want to. Why do I need to study and the list goes on and on. And so one of the objectives, I think, of our way of doing education is to provide a general framework of knowledge for individuals to draw from as they go forward. Much of the knowledge, perhaps, that we are exposed to as children, we don't, in fact, make reference to later on in life, but that's only a direct connection that we're trying to draw. I would suggest that there's a lot of value in the indirect connections with respect to how our mind operates and what it has to operate with by studying a diverse range of subjects and trying to draw information from various fields on various topics. And so, one of the objectives in how we structure our education system should be to make education something that students are interested in, they find interest in, even if from time to time, any given particular day, any particular topic, the student may not recognize or appreciate potentially the value that that topic will bring to them later on in life, just the value of education in general. As necessary, testing for developmental and cognitive impairments will be provided from funds separate from the student stipend. I talk about the stipend idea and a couple of other slides. Here, I just want to make reference to the fact that there ought to be a way, apart from any cost or expenditures on the part of the student personally, there ought to be a way where we as a community, as a society, make available the testing necessary to help identify as early as possible impediments to learning, whether it be poor eyesight or poor hearing, whether it be dyslexia, or whether it be something more serious. But given all that we know about how the mind works, how the body works, how learning operates, we ought to make sure that we are helping individuals who have needs that can be addressed as early as we can, so that they will be able to overcome those impediments to realize themselves, and then by extension, society as a whole realizing the benefits of well educated students, a well educated populace. And then finally, a reading program will be developed to encourage reading across the student's education, focused on classical and contemporary works of note. And so we have, for example, a great list or the great books list and other, top 10 books you should read by the time you graduate high school or whatever it might be. But I would suggest that there ought to be kind of an overarching reading list from kindergarten through high school of materials that at each grade level students are encouraged to read, whether or not they are directly related to the subject matters they are studying in that school year, to again highlight the importance of becoming a good reader in order to become a better learner. And so, creating for every grade level a list of books that the educators, parents, everybody is on board with, encouraging the students to be involved in the reading process, to develop the reading skills, and then to be able to take those skills and apply them particularly on whatever subject matter or career path they take. Well, of course, one of the big problems with anything that we try to do is having enough money to do it. So, what about funding of our education system? I think this is one of the areas where the degree to which I've paid any attention or something has made the news over the years that has always struck me as kind of odd that we aren't more focused as a society on making as quality an education as possible available across the whole spectrum of our student body as we possibly can. Um, there are various reasons why that might be the case, but I would like to put forth some ideas on how we can accomplish or what we ought to be trying to accomplish in the context of funding and paying for an effective education system. So, first, insofar as the formal education system is believed to be a central component in developing the potential of the individual, and insofar as a formal education system serves to develop individuals who have the capacity to serve as productive members of society, it is incumbent on society to develop a method of funding education which affords to individuals, regardless of background, an opportunity to realize their potential. And I suggest that in those situations where you have parents or family situations that don't value an education, but the student does come to appreciate and desires to learn, or you have situations where family dynamics are such that for whatever reason, education is not able to be by choice or by necessity prioritized as much as they would like, that the student, the young person, K through 12 in particular, will still have access to the resources needed to maximize their opportunity for receiving a quality education as they prepare to take their place in society when they move out of the family structure, out of the home, and become responsible citizens. So that it's to all of our benefit to ensure as much as possible that everyone has access to a quality, well funded education. So, in that regard, I would suggest a system of financing education through stipends per child be developed to ensure base funding for each student to be allocated to the school of his or her choice under the direction of his or her parents or guardians. We're talking K through 12, and notwithstanding any laws that are on the books regarding, I believe it's at the age of 18 that an individual's, and maybe earlier, but I think it's 18, that an individual's education records are not open to the parent, that the individual is responsible for and has exclusive access to his or her education records unless he or she signs a waiver granting the parent access. But in the K through 12 system, at least, that the individual will be allocated a stipend to be paid through the individual and by extension the family to the source of education, so that if every individual has $6,000 a year, $500 a month to be applied towards an education, then the student and his or her parents or guardians will select the school from which that education will be received, and then that $500 will be paid to that school to go towards funding the teachers, the supplies, whatever else is needed. And so the degree to which we simply want to guarantee X amount for every school system or X amount per child per day attended, whatever all the different formulas are for trying to calculate how we fund education. And it seems like there ought to be a more streamlined approach that simply moves through the student to the education system the funds available to provide that student education, so that it then becomes incumbent upon the schools, whether it be a charter school or a public school or a homeschool, to utilize the resources available based on the number of students attending to provide a quality education. Uh, Presumably, the higher the quality of education, the greater the number of students attending, and the greater the amount of resources available for funding the different aspects of providing an education. Public facilities for education will be made available and maintained to reflect best practices for creating a positive learning environment, particularly when you get into the later years of middle school and high school. You're going to begin to have a need for resources that are more efficiently provided from or by the community at large, even if they are only accessed by a relatively small percentage of the overall student population. Not not every homeschool is able to afford a full-blown chemistry lab, but the degree to which the chemistry lab is made available through the public school system, and any student who goes to that chemistry lab out of whatever other school system they may be getting their primary education from would then pay a certain amount of that stipend or a certain amount, which would be drawn from the stipend in order to provide support for the chemistry lab that the student is using. So working in a way where we are more efficient in providing resources needed to afford education in even in areas where expenses tend to be higher than they are in other areas of education. And then try to maintain student-teacher ratios conducive to learning, to be supported by the elimination of non-essential staff and administration, particularly in the higher education sphere. But I think this is true through all of the education system. We have spent more and more money on people who are not, in fact, directly related to educating their students. There are different reasons for this, different arguments for this, but I would suggest that one of the things we could probably do even now is, as we step back and think about what education is supposed to accomplish and how best to accomplish it, minimizing and or eliminating those on the payroll who are not directly involved in teaching the children, teaching the students, will be a good first step forward in maximizing the funds that we have available to pay our teachers and to seek to ensure quality education for our students. So, what are some things that we may need to do in order to effect a meaningful transformation of our education system from one that perpetually turns out students who fall below standards, even as those standards are being lowered year to year, decade to decade compared to the past? We need to recalibrate and evaluate what we have against what we determine we ought to have, and then begin to take the steps necessary to move our education program forward. The Department of Education will conduct a thorough review of the expectations for knowledge by the time a student has graduated from high school, given the gains in knowledge since the public education system was initially implemented. One of the things that I've actually commented on from time to time over the last several years is that it doesn't make sense to me, given the vast growth of knowledge and information that we have had over the last 50 to 75 years, that we still have a high school that only lasts for 4 years. There's just so much more to be known than there was when education and the Department of Education, when education as a formal aspect of society was developed. And so we need to really give attention to what we expect our education, our approach to education to provide with respect to the type of individuals who will graduate with a high school degree. And what are the types of information, the degree of information, how much should you know in order to be considered fluent in knowledge to be granted a high school degree? The Department of Education will conduct a thorough review of how best to both facilitate learning for those who are educationally challenged and those who are educationally advanced. Particularly in large number settings, when you have classes of 25 to 30 to 50, it's much harder to both deal with those who can't keep up and keep interested and keep challenged those who are able to work ahead. There's just the great average that everybody shoots for, and nobody is average, so nobody's needs are going to be met. And so, what is it that we need to do to ensure that we have an education system that moves people along at a minimum pace to achieve the objectives we wish to achieve by the time they graduate high school, while also having built into it the resources and the flexibility needed to encourage and take more time with those who need more time to stay on track or to get back on track, and move ahead or allow to move faster those who find things easier to learn than others than the average and are able to move at a quicker pace. And then finally, the Department of Education will conduct a thorough review of what is needed with respect to teacher training and experience at each grade level in each subject. And again, this is one of those things where, depending on the environment, public school, charter school, homeschool, there may need to be different requirements, particularly clarifying that or ensuring that the parents and guardians who make these decisions are aware of the impact. It does not seem reasonable to me to expect a homeschool teacher to be a master's degree student, graduate, et cetera, but the degree to which a parent makes a decision to homeschool their child or children, they need to be fully aware of what that means, and they'll become fully aware as they start to work through the material and put a curriculum together, whether they start from scratch or whether they take an off-the-shelf product that has been created for homeschool situations. But that's a parent making a decision for their child. When you get into the public school system and you now have adults who are responsible for teaching other people's children, what kind of requirements do we expect them to meet? It may be that for some or most classes, a bachelor's degree is necessary or a master's degree is necessary. But it may be that for some grade levels and some subjects, that simple competency as an adult is all that's needed, with some basic training provided for how to help children learn to read, how to work through a sociology text at the high school level, whatever it might be. It's difficult to imagine that someone could teach advanced calculus to a senior high school class without actually having completed the degrees that enable one to at least know calculus, whether or not one has the skill to be able to teach calculus. But it's much more difficult to understand how it is that a parent who is concerned enough to try to teach their child would not be able to work with the material that's provided to be able to teach their child basic math, et cetera, and then in a sense grow with the child through the ages, through the grades, while taking advantage of utilizing resources that are available in the context of homeschool groups and other resources to assist the parent when you get to subject areas where either the parent is not able to work with the material or it requires materials, for example, chemistry experiments and stuff that are just not available to the average home. But trying to ensure that each grade level is staffed with the teachers, the quality of teachers that we need for the students to be able to learn. Well, thank you for taking the time to look at these topics with me. Again, this is mainly an introduction to some ideas that I've had in listening to debates about education, going through education myself. As I mentioned in the first slide on this presentation, there is a particular um, draft platform that I've provided, a component of that platform that addresses, actually in that slide, immigration and education. But this here, I try to flesh out some of the other points that I think ought to be considered when it comes to education in general. And to the left, or to your right, I should say, are a couple of other videos that I think you might find interesting. And I hope to hear back from you on these or any of the other videos that I've put out. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.